Joining me now is TalkTV's royal editor, who's been following the case closely for us, Sarah Hewson. Richard and Jan are still with me. But first, Sarah, if I can, a lot made today of Harry apparently and allegedly, I don't really care, saying, I don't know a lot, 18 times. Why is this relevant?
Well, I suppose we're looking at the strengths and weaknesses of Harry's evidence today, Jeremy. And there were multiple occasions when he was facing Andrew Green, KC, for the Mirror Group, a king's son versus a king's counsel, where he couldn't answer the questions when he was asked, well, how do you know that there was hacking involved? How do you know that that story was obtained by unlawful means? And he would say, well, I don't know, you'll have to ask the journalist. But the point of this case is he's the claimant, and that means he's the one that has to bring the evidence to the case. Now, he was stronger on other occasions. He was stronger on the emotions and how it had made him feel and how this had destroyed parts of his life and his relationships. He did, as you heard from Ollie there, keep his cool, but there was a lot he didn't know. I think in some ways that might have been a tactic. He didn't want to get drawn into difficult technical conversations with the lawyer. It was better to say, I don't know, and then leave it to his legal team to work it out.
It's quite interesting. People have been saying all afternoon, how did he come across? I'll put this to you, Sarah. Badly briefed or found out?
I tell you where I felt that he needed to have done more homework was when it was put to him that on numerous of the stories that he has brought in this case, 33 stories that he has brought in this case in particular, that it was put to him that the elements of those stories he claims were obtained illegally had actually already appeared in other publications. Now, they'd appeared in other newspapers, they'd appeared on the Press Association, they'd appeared on the BBC, for example, they'd even appeared in a statement from the palace. And Prince Harry was asked about those and he said, oh, I don't know, I haven't seen those. Now, his memory seemed to be vague along the way. He often said, well, I don't remember. I remembered it when I look back over this with my legal team. But I think that is one of his weaknesses. And perhaps he should have been more across the detail before bringing those 33 stories. They're 33 out of 148. And he says that was whittled down from 2,500 stories about him. So once they got to the 33, he could have been more across the detail. But where he was stronger was where he was talking about the personal information about him. How could they possibly have known that about me? How could they have known about my conversations with Chelsea Davy if they weren't listening in to my voicemails? How could they have known which flight I was taking if there wasn't some kind of unlawful activity, some kind of blagging going on?
Final question, and thank you so much indeed. We've talked about all sorts of things that have been brought up. The drugs thing was brought up today, a lot of personal stuff there. He questioned that quite rightly, I think, whether some stories were, if not all actually in his mind, were of public interest. What would your opinion be of what he thinks is public interest? Because this is the very essence of this case. You're in the public eye, you're in this goldfish bowl, but you walked away from that. Now you're back moaning about it, but this is historical. What does he deem to be in the public interest?
He kept making a distinction between what's in the public interest and what's interesting to the public. And he was asked that very question, well, what would you say is in the public interest? Stories about his drug taking, for example, he didn't think they were in the public interest. There were stories about whether he was getting preferential treatment at Sandhurst Military Academy because he had a knee injury, and was he not taking part in marches where others was? Was he, as a member of the royal family, getting an easier ride? Was that in the public interest? Was his planned deployment to Afghanistan in the public interest? And he seemed to be suggesting not. And he was asked, well, what would be in the public interest then? And he said a life-threatening injury, for example. That's as far as he could go. And then he clashed with Andrew Green QC on this very issue. And he said, just because I'm a member of the British military, are you saying that everything that I do in my life is fair game for the media? So you could see the passions rising in him there. It's certainly a trigger for him, really, that so much of his life has been played out in the media. And I think that's what we've seen, this struggle with his public persona, with the fame. He talked about the contractual arrangement that he was born into and had no say over. And a lot of that has played out in Court 15, the roles building at the Royal Courts of Justice over
Sarah,
the past
as ever, thank you so much. Detailed analysis. Back to the panel. Joe is still here. Richard Tice. Joe, do you feel sympathy for Harry?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, how could you not? When you look at everything that's happened to him throughout his life, when you look at the way that the press have treated him, I think that, you know, I'd be stunned if anybody said that Prince Harry hasn't had a really rough deal from the media compared to William. And we can't, you know, obviously certain things have been reported about Prince Harry. We don't know if there's certain things that William was getting up to that were similar that weren't reported.
But here's my problem, Joe, right? I started last night by saying, you know, I see a slightly damaged kid who's lost his mother and all that. I gave that point of view. But I cannot get away from the fact that if that is the reason, if that is how you feel, why are you still using that very media that you want to seemingly control whilst discussing what you think of a democratic elected government, Richard Tice, by saying, I'd like you to promote my Netflix documentary. I'd like to use every part of you to promote my bloody book Spare, but actually you're ruining my life. You can't have your cake and eat it, can you?
Well, he thinks he can, but look, the real thing is, I think the judge will look at this and say, is that it? Is that really it? I mean, how does he get to 33 instances and not provide any real evidence? He's claiming hacking, but he hasn't provided any evidence. There's a couple of instances where it looks a bit odd. You think, how did they get that information? But that's very different to saying that was definitely hacking. So I think the judge is going to say, on the balance of probabilities, you haven't proved it. And actually, on many of those cases where the articles were already in the public domain, frankly, he's wasted the court's time, he's wasted the judge's time. I think he's going to lose millions and millions of pounds of legal fees of the other side as he loses the vast majority of this case.
A couple of...
Great chance.
Sorry?
I was going to say, I think he's got a great chance.
I don't at all.
He's only got to get one.
Can I just say, his drug taking was discussed in court today. Do you care if royals take drugs? That's interesting. Yes, 48, no, 52. John, they are in a position of privilege being paid out of public funds or were and should be presenting or representing acceptable standards. Jan, don't care if they take drugs, but I do care if their drug taking is overlooked by the police, as it wouldn't be with others. Andrea, think they can do a little on the side if they're smart about it, because they still should lead by example. VS, being a royal is a job. No other employee can get high during their time. It's a shock. Can I just ask you something that I thought today, Joe? Meghan, where is she? The woman that caused all this, that turned this boy's head. Conspicuous by her absence.
At home, looking after her children. And if she was here and all the paparazzi were around outside the court, then everybody would be saying, Meghan, she's such an attention seeker, she's just coming for a photo op. No, she's being a doting mother in California with her children. And all of this, you know, furore about, you know, they're going to get divorced and all of that, I just think it's absolute nonsense.
Said it the other day, made every newspaper. It's just my own personal opinion, not that of talk. He'll be back in this country within 5 years with his ginger bits between his... I'm telling you now, and she'll be out there with 2 kids. Richard Tice, Joe for now, thank you. Next.